When you connect deeply with someone, it's not just a moment, it's a transaction of energy, emotion, and consciousness. Most people walk through life believing that memory is simply a mental archive, a storage cabinet in the brain that files away information based on logic or chronology. But that's not how the human mind works. The subconscious doesn't operate on a timeline. It operates through emotional frequency. The human mind records energy, not just events. That's why some people can't remember what they had for dinner last Thursday, but they remember the exact way someone looked at them 5 years ago. It wasn't the moment, it was the energy. And when you bring a certain kind of energy into someone's life, one that awakens peace, clarity, value, or even pain, that energy stays embedded within them, whether they are aware of it or not. We have to understand that every interaction, every conversation, every emotional exchange carries a vibrational signature. Some people enter your life and it's like static. They come and go, and your mind doesn't hold on to it. But then there are others who shift something inside of you. They don't have to shout, they don't have to make grand gestures. Something about their presence alters your emotional state. That's because the energy they carry connects with something deeper than your logical mind. It speaks to your soul, it speaks to your wounds, it speaks to your unspoken needs, and even if your rational mind says, forget them, your subconscious says, not yet, there's still something here. When a person is haunted by a memory, they think it's the words or the situation they can't forget. But in truth, it's the emotional current that keeps looping. It's the way that person made them feel safe in a world that felt chaotic. Or the way that person mirrored back a part of them they never knew needed healing. That kind of emotional resonance doesn't fade when someone walks away. In fact, it often gets louder. Why? Because the mind isn't trying to hold onto the person. It's trying to hold onto the energy that person represented. And if they were the first to ever reflect value, love, or even truth into someone's life, that energy becomes a benchmark. The mind compares everything after that to what once was, and the more intense the emotional impact, the harder it becomes to erase that imprint. You see, emotions are not passive, they're powerful, and the subconscious is a master recorder. It takes note of every surge of energy, every shift in vibration, and it embeds those emotional codes deep into your nervous system. That's why someone can try to distract themselves, meet new people, travel to new places, bury themselves in work or even relationships, and yet out of nowhere a thought, a dream, a flash of memory pulls them back. Because the mind isn't just reacting to a thought, it's revisiting a frequency that still hasn't been released. That's the power of emotional imprinting, and you can't override it by simply trying to forget. You can only shift it by acknowledging it, understanding it, and then choosing a new frequency to live by. And here's something most people overlook. You may have never intended to leave such a mark on their life. You might have simply shown up as yourself, authentic, present, real, but in a world full of pretense, that's powerful, that's rare. So the mind holds on, because it doesn't know when it'll encounter something that's genuine again. The mind is not loyal to people. It's loyal to experiences that shift our state of being. When someone feels a version of themselves with you that they can't replicate elsewhere, the mind marks it as significant. And the more they try to replace you, the more the mind reminds them this isn't the same. This is why so many people struggle to move on, even when logically they know the relationship or the connection has ended. It's not about intellect, it's about energetic disruption. You entered their life like a frequency, and now every part of their system is looking for a way to recalibrate. The difficulty is, most people are trying to forget you on a mental level without dealing with you on an energetic one. They block your number, they mute your name, they tell themselves they've moved on. but deep inside, every part of their nervous system still reacts when they hear your favorite song, when they smell your perfume, when someone says a word you always use. That's not obsession, that's resonance, and let's be clear, it's not manipulation either. You didn't force that into their system, they were open to it, they were available for it, they let it in. And once it got in, it became a part of them, because they experienced a part of themselves they'd never known. That is what the mind remembers. That is what the subconscious replays. That is why, even when they try to forget you, their own thoughts, emotions, and reflections won't let them. They think they're remembering you, but they're really chasing a version of themselves that only existed in your presence. When you remove yourself from someone's life, something begins to shift, not just in the physical realm, but in the psychological and emotional space as well. Your absence starts speaking louder than your presence ever could. When you were there, it may have seemed like your energy blended in, like your words, your gestures, your kindness, even your silence were just background noise in their chaotic world. But the moment you pull back, the vacuum you leave behind becomes a mirror. It reflects everything they couldn't see when you were near. That stillness becomes the loudest sound. That silence becomes their new soundtrack. And it plays on repeat, reminding them of the substance they didn't recognize while it was right in front of them. See, presence is often taken for granted. People get used to your check-ins, your warmth, your care, and the calm you bring. They assume it will always be there. But the moment you're no longer available, they begin to realize that your energy wasn't just pleasant. It was anchoring them. It was giving them balance, grounding, a sense of emotional stability. Your presence had weight, and when you lifted that weight, everything else in their life started to feel light, unstable, and disconnected. They start to notice how empty conversations feel with others, how forced the laughter sounds, how meaningless small talk becomes. Because they got used to depth, and your absence strangely brings that depth back into focus. It haunts them in the quiet moments in between phone calls, in the spaces no one else can fill. Most people are not consciously aware of the value someone brings into their life until that value is withdrawn. When you were present, you were a source of energy they could draw from, whether they acknowledged it or not. You were their place of emotional exhale, the one who saw behind the masks, the one who understood their silence, not just their words. But when that energy is gone, the contrast becomes undeniable. The mind begins to search for what it used to feel. The heart begins to ache for what it didn't appreciate. They begin to realize that your presence wasn't a convenience. It was a covering. You covered their insecurities with encouragement. You covered their doubts with belief. You covered their restlessness with peace. And now that covering is gone, they feel exposed in ways they never expected. The human psyche is wired to notice contrast. It's how we know light from dark, joy from sadness, fullness from emptiness. And when someone loses your presence, the contrast between what they had and what they're left with becomes their new reality. They begin to notice how people respond to them differently now. The conversations don't hit the same. The support feels shallow. The laughter lacks authenticity, because you weren't just another person. You were a different frequency, and now that frequency is gone, every replacement feels like noise instead of music. They may try to surround themselves with distractions, seek validation elsewhere, or pretend like they've moved on, but something in them keeps looking over their shoulder, because your absence keeps whispering the truth they're not ready to hear. Even in silence, you are still speaking to them. Every text you no longer send, every call you no longer make, every gesture you no longer offer, it all becomes a message. A message that says, I was there, and now I'm not. I showed up, and now I've stepped back. I gave you a version of me that was real, and now that version is no longer available. And that message begins to echo in their everyday life. They replay old moments not because they are obsessed with you, but because they are obsessed with how they felt around you. You didn't just leave a gap in their schedule, you left a gap in their spirit. And that kind of absence doesn't just fade away. They begin to ask themselves questions they never asked before. Why did I push them away? Why didn't I value them when they were around? Why does it feel like something is missing even though everything looks the same? These are the questions that don't let them rest. These are the thoughts that follow them when they lie in bed, stare at the ceiling, or scroll endlessly through their phone looking for something that resembles what they had with you. The mind starts to fixate on the space you once filled, not because you were perfect, but because you were present, and there's a difference. Anyone can say the right words. Anyone can show up on the surface. But not everyone brings presence. Presence is when your soul arrives with your body. Presence is when your energy sits in the room even when you're silent. Presence is when someone feels seen, heard, and held without you needing to perform. When that kind of presence goes missing, the world doesn't feel the same. People don't feel the same. They notice how rare it was, how consistent it was, how effortless you made it look, until they tried to replace it. But your absence keeps reminding them what they lost wasn't ordinary. What they let go of was not common. And now, in your silence, they are forced to sit with the truth. The mind doesn't let them forget, not just because of who you were, but because of what your presence activated in them. And now that it's gone, they're left with the aftershock. There is a unique power in emotional imprinting that most people fail to understand. It's not about how much time you spent with someone. It's not about how many conversations you had or how many laughs you shared. Emotional imprinting is about intensity. It's about how deeply someone felt something while they were with you. That feeling becomes a marker in their subconscious. It brands itself into their emotional memory like a scar, not always painful but always permanent. The mind doesn't store memories in order. It stores them by how they made you feel. So when a moment is intensely joyful, deeply vulnerable, unexpectedly comforting, or heartbreakingly honest, that moment becomes part of someone's internal wiring. And no matter how much time passes, they keep coming back to it. Not because they want to, but because the mind is designed to replay what it doesn't fully understand or what it still longs for. When you emotionally imprint someone, it's because you reached a place in them no one else has reached. Maybe you understood the pain behind their jokes. Maybe you sat with them in silence when words felt too heavy. Maybe you spoke life into a place they didn't even realize was broken. Or maybe you simply saw them, not their performance, not their potential, but their essence. You looked beyond what they did and saw who they were. And in a world that constantly demands masks, you made them feel safe enough to take theirs off. That moment becomes everything. It becomes the reference point. Because now every interaction they have with others is unconsciously being compared to the connection they felt with you, and when others fall short, and they usually do, the mind revisits that emotional imprint like a favorite song that suddenly makes more sense with time. There's a sacred kind of intimacy that comes with being emotionally understood. It doesn't always look romantic. It doesn't always come with grand declarations, but it creates a quiet bond that lingers far beyond your presence. Because it's not just about being with someone. It's about being felt by someone. And when someone feels seen and understood at their core, it becomes incredibly difficult for them to forget the person who gave them that experience. The more they try to move forward, the more they find themselves circling back, not always to the person, but to the emotional state that person made them feel. They may not be in love with you anymore. They may not even speak your name, but their nervous system remembers you, their heart remembers you, their spirit remembers the way they felt around you, free, accepted, alive, heard. The truth is, we rarely forget people who made us feel something real. The world is full of temporary thrills, surface-level compliments, and fleeting distractions. But someone who stirs the soul, that's rare, that's unforgettable. You could have known them for 6 months and impacted them more than someone who's been in their life for 6 years. Because time is not the measurement of connection, depth is, and depth leaves a mark. It gets into the corners of the heart that even they didn't know existed, and once those corners have been touched, they stay tender. So even if they try to pretend they've moved on, something as small as a scent, a song, a phrase you once used, it all brings it back. That's the power of emotional imprinting. It's invisible, but it's real. It's quiet, but it's persistent. It doesn't beg for attention. It simply exists, pulsing in the background of their consciousness, and it's not always welcome. Sometimes people try to forget those who impacted them the most because remembering means confronting emotions they don't know how to process. Remembering means admitting vulnerability, admitting loss, admitting that they were changed. And change, especially emotional change, is hard to face. So instead, they try to suppress the imprint. They throw themselves into distractions. They label the past as a phase, a mistake, or a lesson. But the imprint isn't logical, it's emotional, and emotions don't disappear just because you deny them. They wait. They surface when you're least expecting it, in the quiet moments, in the pauses between distractions. In the depth of a night, when the world goes silent and there's no one left to impress. They might scroll through photos and feel a sudden tightness in their chest. They might hear someone laugh and feel an ache they can't explain. They might wake up from a dream that reminds them of a time when they felt more whole, more real, more connected. And even if they try to brush it off, their body knows, their mind knows, their soul knows. The imprint is still there. It doesn't scream, but it lingers. It doesn't interrupt their life, but it colors everything they experience. They carry it with them, quietly, subtly, always. That's the kind of connection that doesn't die easily. It evolves, it changes form, but it never truly vanishes. Because emotional imprinting isn't about holding on to the person. It's about holding on to the way they made you feel. And when those feelings reach deep enough, they live on long after the goodbye. When someone tries to forget you, they often underestimate the way their own subconscious mind works. You see, the human mind doesn't just delete memories. It stores them in layers, filed away based on emotional intensity. The more someone tried to hide their feelings for you while you were around, the more unresolved those emotions become when you're gone. Suppression doesn't erase attachment. It amplifies it. What you suppress only gains more strength in the silence. So while they may act cold, indifferent, or even detached on the outside, deep within, their mind is doing something they can't fully control. It's reviewing, replaying, reliving. They think they're letting go, but what they're really doing is giving the memories more oxygen in the dark. Because what we avoid emotionally has a way of returning, not as a passing thought, but as a persistent echo. They try to distract themselves. New people, new routines, long nights out, overworking. Anything to fill the space you once occupied. But distraction doesn't cure emotional residue. It merely delays the processing. Every time something familiar shows up, a song, a street, a scent, a phrase, it reopens the file they tried to close. And that file isn't just filled with moments. It's filled with the emotions attached to them. That one conversation where they felt completely understood. That night they broke down and you didn't judge them. That smile you gave when they were unsure of themselves. Those things don't just disappear when you leave. They live in the nervous system. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. And here's the twist. The harder someone tries to forget you, the more power they give to your memory. Avoidance isn't release, it's a sign of emotional entanglement. You don't try hard to forget what means nothing. You don't fight to erase someone who didn't matter. The very act of trying not to think about you confirms how deeply they do. Their avoidance becomes a ritual. They avoid certain songs, skip certain spots, don't bring your name up, not because they're over you, but because they're terrified of what remembering might do to them. They're afraid it'll break the illusion of detachment they've built so carefully. And then comes the silence, that long stretch of days where they tell themselves it's over, that you're out of sight and out of mind. But silence doesn't just sit still, it speaks. It creates space, and in that space their unspoken feelings grow louder. What they didn't say, what they didn't admit, what they thought they could bury, those things rise in the quiet. And late at night, when their mind slows down and the world stops moving, the images start to come back. The ones they never wanted to face, the things they never resolved, the feelings they pretended didn't exist. It's not just memory, it's emotional residue, and it lingers. What makes it even more powerful is the fact that they never fully expressed it. Unexpressed emotions are like debts we carry inside. Until they're acknowledged, they weigh down the soul. So now they're left with the weight of unsaid apologies, withheld affection, and missed chances. They may try to rationalize it, blame timing, differences, circumstances, but rational thinking doesn't overwrite emotional truth. The feelings remain, the love they tried to ignore, the care they never voiced, the impact they never admitted. These things don't die in silence, they grow. There's also a phenomenon in human psychology known as emotional contrast. It means the more peace you brought, the more they feel your absence in chaos. The more comfort you provided, the more they feel discomfort with others. The more safe they felt in your presence, the more exposed they feel now. So when they try to replace you, when they reach for something new hoping to replicate what they had, it never quite measures up. Because what you offered wasn't just a vibe, it was a sanctuary. You gave them something real, and now everything else feels hollow by comparison. People often think forgetting is an act of strength, but in reality, it's often a defense mechanism. It's not strength to deny your emotions, it's fear, and deep down they know that, so they project indifference. They move on quickly, hoping to prove something, to you, to themselves, to the world. But the truth is fast. Moving doesn't mean healing. Sometimes the speed is a mask. Sometimes the silence is a scream. And sometimes what looks like forgetting is really the beginning of remembering in a way that finally feels undeniable. This is how the mind works. It doesn't cooperate with ego. It doesn't submit to pride. It doesn't care about appearances. It responds to truth. And when the truth is you touched their soul, when you made them feel something real, when you left a mark that wasn't surface level, then even their own effort to forget you becomes the very proof of how unforgettable you truly are. The truth is, people don't forget presence, they forget convenience. They forget the people who were just there to pass time, to entertain, to distract. But when someone's presence brings peace, clarity, healing, when your energy becomes a place where they feel safe to be seen and not judged, where they can exhale the weight they hide from the world, then your absence becomes louder than your words ever were. That presence lingers. It becomes a space they crave, even if they can't explain it. Because what the mind can't always articulate, the heart continues to feel, and it doesn't matter how much time passes or how far life pulls you apart, that imprint becomes part of their emotional landscape. They carry it with them, often unconsciously, but it shows up in the choices they make, in the comparisons they draw, in the dissatisfaction they feel with what once seemed enough. And the presence you offered was more than just physical. It was spiritual, emotional, psychological. You were present in the way you listened, in the way you remembered what they said even when they didn't think it mattered, in the way you made them feel like they weren't alone in their confusion, in their fear, in their search for meaning. You didn't demand attention, but you gave attention. You didn't try to change them, you simply accepted them. That kind of presence is rare. In a world that's loud and demanding, where everyone is trying to be heard, few people offer the gift of silence, space, and understanding. But you did, and that's why it's hard to forget you, because you didn't just take up space. You filled a void. There's a kind of presence that doesn't have to speak to be felt. It walks into a room and shifts the atmosphere, not with force, but with calm. You gave that. You showed up with a calm that grounded them, with a strength that didn't overpower but steadied. You didn't try to impress. You allowed your authenticity to be the invitation. And for someone who spent most of their life being misunderstood, overlooked, or valued only for what they could offer, that authenticity was a breath of fresh air. It broke through their defenses. It softened their resistance, and long after the words are forgotten, that feeling remains. So when you're no longer around, they don't just miss the conversations. They miss how they felt during them. They don't just miss your face. They miss the way your presence made them feel at peace with themselves. Because that's the thing, when someone is truly present, they don't make the moment about themselves. They make it safe for others to be themselves. You didn't try to steal the spotlight. You held space. You didn't try to fix them. You walked beside them. That presence was healing. It was restorative. And now that it's gone, it creates an emotional gap they struggle to fill. And what most people don't realize is that presence creates contrast. When someone experiences genuine presence, shallow energy becomes intolerable. They may go out with others, surround themselves with crowds, fill their schedule, but nothing feels the same, because presence isn't about being in the same room. It's about being emotionally, spiritually, mentally attuned. And not many people offer that. So they'll talk, they'll laugh, they'll go through the motions. But underneath there's a hollowness, a sense that something's missing, that something used to feel real, and now everything feels performative. Your presence disrupted their norm. You didn't play by the script. You didn't say what they wanted to hear. You said what their soul needed, and that's why they can't forget you. Not because you were loud, but because you were real. Not because you stood out, but because you tuned in. Presence is a frequency, and once someone has experienced that level of connection, their soul becomes tuned to it. It searches for it, often unconsciously. And when it can't find it, when everything else feels like noise in comparison to the calm you brought, they begin to realize that not everyone can offer what you did, and presence doesn't leave when the person does. It lingers. It becomes part of the emotional atmosphere someone carries. It follows them into new relationships, into quiet moments, into sleepless nights. It becomes the standard, not in a way that's about comparison or competition, but in a way that reveals what was real. They begin to feel the weight of your absence not just because of who you were, but because of who they were when they were around you. The version of themselves that felt more whole, more grounded, more seen. That version of them doesn't just vanish, it waits. It waits for a presence that can meet it again, but few do, because most are still performing, still rushing, still filling silence with noise. You weren't that. You brought stillness, and stillness is unforgettable, not because it demands attention, but because it returns people to themselves. Your presence reminded them of who they are beneath the fear, the shame, the chaos, and that reminder echoes through their life, even when you're no longer there to speak it. There is a moment that always comes after the silence, after the distancing, after the pretending to forget, and it's the moment of emotional realization. It creeps in quietly, without warning, sometimes during a conversation with someone new, or maybe while lying awake in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, questioning the choices made. It's that sudden awareness that what they tried to suppress hasn't really disappeared. It was only dormant. The mind can ignore, delay, even deny feelings, but it cannot erase truth, and the truth always surfaces, especially emotional truth. It may be wrapped in confusion or guilt or longing, but it rises because it has nowhere else to go. The mind will replay it again and again until it's acknowledged, until it's felt. This is the stage where most people become deeply conflicted. They thought moving on was the same as healing, but now they realize they were only moving away, not forward. They changed the scenery, but not the story. They tried to edit out the chapter where you existed, but the problem is, you weren't just a part of the story. You were a turning point. You showed up during a phase where they needed clarity, where they needed to face themselves, where they were most vulnerable, and instead of running from that moment, you stood there with them, not to fix them, not to save them, but to simply hold space for them. That kind of connection is not seasonal. It's transformational, and transformation isn't forgotten. It's remembered, especially in contrast to everything that comes after. So when they try to replace you with a different face, a new routine or fresh distractions, what they eventually realize is that none of it erases the emotional imprint you left behind. That imprint follows them. It speaks to them through misaligned conversations, through awkward silences with people who don't really understand them, through the unease of settling for connections that feel forced. It shows up when they laugh but feel empty, when they smile but feel disconnected, because no matter how good the new looks, it doesn't resonate with the soul the way your presence did. And the more they chase novelty, the more they feel the ache of what was real. They begin to see that forgetting someone isn't a decision, it's an illusion. It's not about removing the memory, it's about numbing the feeling. But numbing always comes with a cost. It deadens joy. It distorts perception. It creates a barrier between them and everything authentic, because you can't selectively numb emotions. If they numb the pain of losing you, they also numb the joy they felt with you, and suddenly life feels muted. Experiences feel surface level. Nothing penetrates deeply anymore. They function, but they don't feel. They exist, but they don't connect. And underneath it all is that one truth they haven't admitted. They never truly let go. And the reason they didn't is because they never allowed themselves to feel the fullness of what you meant to them. They were too busy trying to be strong, trying to appear unaffected, trying to convince themselves and others that they were over it. But healing doesn't come from pretending, it comes from presence. Presence with pain, presence with regret, presence with love that was never fully expressed. The heart doesn't care about appearances, it only knows what it felt. And it felt something with you that cannot be replicated with distractions or detachment. So now they carry this invisible weight, a memory not fully embraced, a goodbye not fully accepted, a feeling not fully processed. And it seeps into everything, into their relationships, their solitude, their thoughts. It affects how they show up, how open they are, how willing they are to risk vulnerability again. Because deep down they fear they've already experienced something that won't come again. And that fear becomes a silent grief, not just for you, but for the version of themselves they were when they were with you. A version that felt understood, that felt seen, that felt whole. And there's the truth they've been avoiding all along. You weren't just someone they cared about. You were a mirror. You reflected back to them parts of themselves they had buried. You reminded them of their potential, of their worth, of their softness. And now that the mirror is gone, they're forced to face their own reflection alone, unsure, trying to remember who they were before they tried so hard to forget you. But the mind won't let them, not because it wants to hurt them, but because it wants to wake them up. Wake them up to what was real, wake them up to what they lost, wake them up to what still lingers beneath the surface, because some people don't need reminders. They are the reminder, and you, in every unspoken way, became that for them.